Russia has not been able to capture any major Ukrainian city more than a month after it first invaded its neighbor. In the past few days, several Western reports have been doing rounds of Russia changing its strategy in Ukraine. Earlier this week, Moscow even hinted at concentrating on eastern Ukraine, that is the Donbas region. And in the latest, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence has said that Russia is trying to split Ukraine into two parts to create a Moscow-controlled region, after failing to take over the whole country. He said that is looking to create a divide similar to North and South Korea, in reference to the division of Korea after World War II. Now, Kirilo Bandanov, the military intelligence chief, announced that Ukraine will soon launch a guerrilla warfare in Russian-occupied eastern Ukrainian territory. He added, and I quote, "Once the warfare starts, then there will be one relevant scenario left for the Russians, how to survive," unquote. When Russian President Vladimir Putin first announced Moscow's special military operation in the Donbas region, he said that the goal was demilitarizing and denazifying its neighbor, that is Ukraine. Putin also claimed that Russia was acting in defense of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk republics in the country's east. The operation was launched just 2 days after Putin recognized the two regions as independent. Even as the war wages on across Ukraine, the head of Ukraine's Luhansk separatist region has said that it may hold a referendum on becoming part of Russia. Now, speaking to a Russian news agency, Leonid Pasachink has said, and I quote, "I think that in the near future a referendum will be held on the territory of the Republic, during which the people will express their opinion on joining the Russian Federation. I am sure this will be the case," unquote. Now, reacting to the future vote, Ukraine has said that Russia holding a referendum in occupied Ukrainian territory would have no legal basis and would face a strong response from the international community, deepening its global isolation. The Luhansk separatist leader hopes for a similar outcome as 2014. That is when Russia annexed Crimea, and people overwhelmingly voted to break with Ukraine and join Russia, a vote that much of the world refused to recognize. Now, we are being joined by John Erath, who is a policy director of the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. Thank you for being with us on this broadcast. We'll jump right in. Do you think that Russia is changing its strategy in Ukraine, considering it has been more than a month and they have still not taken a single major Ukrainian city?
I think Russia's strategy in Ukraine and its strategic goals remain unchanged. They want to create a situation where they are able to dominate as much of the country as possible and create a situation where they have a voice in Ukraine's future security decisions. This would be some kind of de facto colonization of the Ukraine and of the neighboring country.
Right. And what do you make of the comments that Russia might want to split Ukraine into two sections in the same way as North and South Korea were split post-World War II? And what do you think about this?
This is an old strategy from the Russian playbook. It's similar to what they have done in Georgia and Moldova already, where they control separatist regions that nobody except Russia and a few of Russia's allies recognize, and use these regions to exert some kind of control over the policies that come out of the central governments of those countries.
Right, and we heard a fiery speech from U.S. President Biden yesterday. Take us through the latest in the West's efforts for trying to bring a halt to this war.
President Biden this week met with NATO allies and then visited Poland, which is, of course, the frontline country in the war, where he gave assurances that the U.S. remains committed to its NATO obligations and will defend the territories of NATO countries should the war spill over into those. So that's very consistent with what the U.S. policy has been throughout. I think we are now seeing a greater sense of unity and a greater understanding that NATO countries have to stay together in order to manage this situation as best as possible and hopefully bring the war to a conclusion as early as possible.
Right, and the military intelligence chief announced that Ukraine will soon launch guerrilla warfare in the Russian-occupied eastern territory of Ukraine. Take us through what these comments.
This, I believe, was in reaction to the news that there may be a consideration of another referendum to be held in the Russian-occupied areas, where presumably only Russian occupiers and their sympathizers would be able to vote. So this is a way that Ukraine is saying that they are not going to accept such a transparently staged referendum and would have the means to resist and to create different kind of reality. Clearly, there are people in these areas that are under Russian occupation who object to that occupation. And Ukraine, I believe, wants to mobilize these people in opposition.
Mm. And what do you make of the nuclear threat that Putin poses at the moment?
I've been saying all along that the possibility that Russia would use a nuclear weapon is still very low. Nuclear weapons create immense destruction. They have no tactical military use. If you want to occupy a country, you don't destroy it first. And if a nuclear weapon were used on a military target, it would destroy not just that military target, but all the surrounding areas. So there's no real security reason to use a nuclear weapon. The possibility, however, is there. It may be that as Russia continues to do very badly in this war, as Russia continues to be embarrassed, that the opportunity cost of using a weapon of mass destruction may seem somewhat lower. And this is where it is very important that Putin hear a consistent message from everywhere else in the world that it is simply unacceptable to use weapons of mass destruction, especially when their primary victims would be civilians.
Absolutely. John, thank you very much for your valuable insights and joining us on this broadcast.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.